everybody, and welcome to Input 2 as we continue our coverage of that spooky, scary Halloween content. And I'm your host, Emily Reuben, but I have two new faces, voices, I guess. I don't know. They're two new people on this podcast. If you can see them, something's very wrong. Over here, I have...
Tanner Kinney.
And what do you do here at Byte, Tanner?
I'm the reviews editor. I write reviews and other features and strange things.
And...
I'm Matthew Yapp, the managing editor, and I don't like to brag, but kind of a slasher movie aficionado.
He's actually perfect for this podcast because we are going to be talking about the new Halloween, which is a follow-up to one of my favorite movies of all time, Halloween. So really quickly, I just want to introduce the film very briefly. It premiered at Toronto International Film Festival on September 8th and got good reception, and then it released this past Thursday on October 19th. It was directed by David Gordon Green. But before we get into that, let's talk about the first Halloween, because I think it's critically important. So let's recap the first film a little bit, but not too much, because I think most people know it.
You guys get the idea.
It's not a very complex movie.
I think it's super complex.
In terms of lore, it's fairly simple.
It's not really
at the
complex.
start. At least the first movie.
Yeah, so it came out in 1978, and it was directed by John Carpenter and Deborah Hill. And we are going to highlight Deborah Hill because no one else does, and dang it, I'm so tired of it.
No, because everyone knows John Carpenter. He's a very talented man. Yeah. But Deborah, she's just as important. She played just the same role.
She, for those who don't know, she was a co-writer, and they wrote it together, and she was his girlfriend at the time, which I think
I did not know that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think they are anything now. But one of the things I love about the original Halloween is it respects women.
Yes.
And I really like that they actually sound like women talking, and that's because of Deborah, because she wrote all of the dialogue for all of the women. Yeah. It was actually a woman, and I think for a slasher film, that's so rare, and I really appreciate it, and everybody should go and hug Deborah because no one seems to care about her. But anyway,
we care about you, Deborah.
So anyway, the film basically, it stars, Jamie Lee Curtis as Laurie Strode, and she gets stalked by Michael Myers. Do we need to say anything else about it?
I mean, people get murdered. A dog gets murdered. 5 people.
And a dog, yeah. And it's really famous. It had a huge impact on horror movies. And Matt, I'm sure you know a bunch about that.
Yeah, so one of my favorite topics of study is the formula of slasher movies. And Halloween really did lay great groundwork for these are the ticks. This is what makes Laurie Strode the final girl. These are it very much creates kind of a formula. And I'm not going to say it full on made it, but I would say it was one of the biggest at the time that really stuck to and gave the public a idea of what a slasher movie will look like.
Yeah. And this film was only shot for $300,000, which is nothing. For films, just for reference, a low-budget film by today's standards is $1 million. So they had nothing, and the music it was recorded in 3 days. This movie was made with little to nothing, and it paved the way for other horror films with low budgets to enter the mainstream, and without this film we wouldn't have your Friday the 13th, I don't know, Chainsaw Massacre, Elm Street, any of those movies that are such pop culture icons would not exist.
And a lot of what I think we see in kind of this new wave of horror movie franchises and just parodying themselves, Scream very openly parodies kind of the slasher movie formula, and again, all these new horror movies that do that, I think, is a large part to do with Halloween.
Yeah.
Yeah, and a lot of these Blumhouse movies, these really cheap-looking horror movies, in my mind, these kind of are emulating this old style of making horror movies.
Right. Something else I want to highlight about the original Halloween is I know a lot of people, especially people our age, might not like the original because it's not scary.
It's not.
It's cheesy.
The kills are cheap.
Oh, they're so cheap.
And I mean, even when he hides the bodies, we can see it coming. She's going to open a closet and someone's going to be dangling. But you have to look at it through the context at the time. What these shots that we think are really cliche, this film made those shots.
Yeah, that's why they're cliche.
It's because of this film. This is the original. The opening scene where it's the tracking shot and we see everything through Michael's perspective, this is one of the most important shots in film history. That's not an exaggeration. That was not done before, but we see it all the time now.
Yeah.
And it's kind of cool to see a horror movie defining something because no one cares about horror movies.
Also, I will say something that is almost a joke now, but the Michael Myers like dun dun dun, it's like music that they created is just so ingrained into pop culture. I think a lot of people would just know it as like scary music now. They wouldn't even know it was Halloween because how big of an impact it had.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and like one of the articles said, John Carpenter crafted it on a Casio keyboard in 3 days. Just like on his own, he was like beep 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 beep.
They literally couldn't get a budget, so he just like rented out a recording studio and was like, "Well, let's get down to it." Makes mad 80s.
You gotta make it done.
Before
I will
the
say
80s.
though, one of my bigger complaints about the first movie is I think that sound effect is overly used, but that's another conversation.
Which one? The da-na-na thing?
No, the iconic Michael sound. The beep, 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 beep. It's every time we see him. It really does
true.
get old.
I don't know. I kind of love that.
Do you?
I
think
kind of love that.
I love it in a cheesy way. I cannot imagine watching it at the time and being like,
No, yeah.
Michael's coming. Like, I don't know. So that's kind of our like very brief historical context of Halloween. So let's shift our focus to the new Halloween. And let's just for a little perspective on how it did. On Rotten Tomatoes, it was certified fresh and it got an 80% critic rating, but a viewer rating of 78, which I thought was interesting because usually with movies like this, the critic rating is lower.
Yeah.
And the viewer rating is higher. I don't know. I've not really seen too many complaints about
No,
the
so
movie.
after seeing it myself, I was also very surprised by the audience score.
Yeah, I thought it'd be higher, honestly.
Yeah.
I thought the critic rating would be lower.
Just because it's a horror movie, honestly.
Yeah, so interesting. Good job, Halloween.
Right.
Well, a lot of times, this is just like a general thing that user scores are higher than critic scores for most movies, unless there's like some kind of campaign against the film, like
Star Wars.
Yeah.
Every Star Wars movie, all of those. Just that's a mess. But with horror movies, especially, even the crappy ones like Wish Upon, you have higher audience ratings because they're like, it was a scare. It gave me a jump. I liked it.
Very in-depth
Yes.
analysis there. And speaking of in-depth analysis, I like to do this thing where like I pull a positive review and then a negative review. And this one was interesting because I'll get into it in a second. So the positive review is by Richard Roper from the Chicago Sun-Times, and he said director Green isn't trying to reinvent the sequel Halloween. The 2018 version is the B-movie sequel Halloween. The 1978 version has always deserved. I think that's perfect.
I agree.
No.
I think that's perfect. Good for you, Richard Roper. And then my favorite is the negative review by Rex Reed from The Observer, and he says the result is a disappointing collection of the usual familiar cliches, including kids too stoned or drunk to use common sense. I'm not really sure what he's talking about there because there's only one instance of that. Or drunk to use common sense when the floor creaks in an empty house, victims who lose their cell phones before danger strikes, and an assortment of dumb cops and naive psychiatrists who say things about the monster like, remember, he's the property of the state. He mustn't be harmed.
I don't think he watched the movie right.
Did he watch the same movie?
Yeah, like even the cell phone thing, like I thought, it's a trope, but that doesn't necessarily make it bad.
No, and one of the things I was actually going to say is I think they did it incredibly well for once that people had like a proper reaction to like terror going on. The only thing other than there is a dumb drunk kid who makes dumb decisions. Maybe there was a babysitter who like went upstairs to check when a boy was like, there's someone in the house, but little kids are dumb and babysitters aren't supposed to immediately call the cops.
I think it's also fair to say that horror movies require a little bit of a suspension of disbelief.
They do.
It's also a Michael Myers movie. I know that's not necessarily an excuse, but I'm not really sure what this person was looking for in this movie. I don't know. I just think reviews like that are interesting because it seems like they missed this film wasn't even made for them, so why did they go?
They missed the point.
So I guess it's fair to say this movie is getting positive and negative reviews. I have seen negative reviews on Twitter that have been saying, like, this movie is so boring, which I disagree with.
I've gotten a lot of, like, people saying it's not scary, which I could see where you're going for.
I mean, it's not.
It's not scary in the slightest. It's a slasher film. Are slasher films supposed to be scary?
I don't think so, and I would really argue till the cows come home that I don't think slashers are meant to be scary, but some people do go in wanting that.
Yeah, because, like, from how I see it, horror movies are like, you have thriller horror movies that are just like, you're on the edge of your seat and it's really intense.
Right.
And then you have the slasher films, which you're there to see people get murderized in so many different ways.
Yeah, I go for fun.
Yeah.
I mean, I saw this movie twice this weekend.
Nice.
The second theater I was at, everyone was screaming and like every little jump that wasn't even a jump scare. I don't know, but the first time Tanner and we saw it together, we were the most annoying.
I was the loudest.
Like, and it wasn't even like a scared reaction. It was like we were having fun. So
I only went once. I went with a friend of mine who does not watch horror movies. He doesn't particularly care for them, but he was rather scared. Like every time anything would happen, like Michael Myers would just kind of be around and he knew someone was about to die and he would just go,
Aw. So it is subjective, I guess.
Yeah.
But I personally think it was fine the way it was. And apparently other audiences thought so too, because according to MovieWeb, this past weekend it scored #1 at the box office, which is no surprise, honestly.
What was this competition? Venom? Week 3 Venom? Who's seeing Venom still, other than me?
Tanner just keeps going back.
it's a shame.
So it ended up with $77.5 million domestically, which is the best in the franchise. Rob Zombie's was open to $26 million. So it beat Rob Zombie, and that's really all I care about.
That's really important to me.
But what does kind of make me sad is it's still not the highest grossing horror film. Well, not highest grossing, but opening horror film, because it beat it out by like a massive amount. It has no hope.
Yeah.
I can't see any horror film in the near future beating out it. That was such a nominal.
Really, that's just disappointing.
I liked it.
I liked it. Get it? It's a hat.
But I think this movie was better. So maybe it'll pick up. I doubt it at this point. But it's doing very well, and I think part of that is just like people have been waiting for Halloween, and because it advertised itself as like, look, we're gonna pretend none of those dumb sequels happened.
But H2O, you mean the Nick show about the mermaids?
That's all it is now.
That's Michael Myers as a mermaid. I would watch that.
I would 1,000% watch that.
He's slaying people in the ocean. But that's not what this film is about, which is actually disappointing. I think I take back my my love for it. So let's get into spoiler territory. If you haven't seen this movie, I don't really know why you're listening, but
it's a little odd. But
maybe
you
stop,
do you,
because we are going to spoil this movie. Like, we're gonna really go into it.
Yeah.
So Matt or Tanner or both, tell me about this movie. What happened?
Okay, so I think this movie found its biggest strength in the fact that I feel like this was a movie that was about a rivalry between Laurie Strode, not Cynthia Myers. That's not her name now, canonically. Laurie Strode and Michael Myers, in the sense that he's been waiting to come back for her and she has been waiting for him to come. So I think this whole movie is this really cool battle of Laurie trying to protect her family because Michael's come back to kill them all, and Laurie is prepped and ready to fight Michael Myers. Also, a lot of other people died.
A lot of people die.
16. I kept track.
I think that's the biggest kill count
in
the series. Good job, film.
But no dogs. No dogs or babies.
Oh, we're gonna get it. We're gonna get into that.
Should've been a baby.
I've got you. That is my absolute biggest complaint about this movie. We won't get into that. So I've mentioned this like a billion times, but it's honestly the most important aspect of the film for me is that this is a completely new film. It doesn't focus on, Halloween 2, 3, even though 3 is not part of this at all.
Yeah.
The initial discussion was to actually include the second Halloween in the lore.
Mm-hmm.
And this was mentioned with the director in an interview with Collider. But Danny McBride was actually one that was like, no, let's just pretend that didn't happen either. And then Jeff Bradley actually took it a step further because he wrote the tracking shot with Michael as he first goes door to door. Mm-hmm. And Green was like, all right, that's pretty cool. But they couldn't really institute that if there was the second movie because there'd be some sister relationship, and then it wouldn't be random, and then it wouldn't be scary. So they firmly understand that what makes Michael scary is that there is no reason. It's not because she's his sister.
I was reading a quote, and it was basically the reason it's not scary anymore if Michael and Laurie are brother and sister is because I'm not Michael's brother. I'm not Michael's sister. There would be no reason for Michael to come kill me. Because even though he does kill other people, you're never going to be around like a serial killer's brother or sister, probably. So it removes you a bit, which I do agree with.
Yeah. I don't have anything to say to that. So yeah.
That was a very assertive Like you were coming in. Do you think that was a good idea then?
I do.
So,
absolutely.